Welcome to Heart, Soul and Melanin. I'm here to tell you about people who've earned their love stories, the ones who've spent years being strong and are finally ready to be seen. These are the London love stories, Black British romance for anyone who's reached the midpoint of life. Hit subscribe because every week we bring you a new story. Real bodies, real struggles, real love. This is The Night Shift.
The sun rose differently over South London that morning. For Simone Richards, the 15-year winter of her solitude had finally broken in the warmth of David Okonkwo's arms. After the high stakes of the hospital and the years of being the strong one, she'd finally allowed herself to be seen and to be held. But David is a man bound by a history that he hasn't yet left behind, and Simone is a woman who has worked too hard for her peace to settle for being a question mark in his life. Can a love born in the shadows of the night shift survive the harsh light of day? Or is some baggage too heavy to carry into a new beginning? Tell us in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between honouring your past and embracing your future? This is the conclusion of The Night Shift.
The early morning light in Simone's bedroom was filtered through the heavy linen curtains, casting the room in a soft, hazy grey. Simone woke first. She lay still, her body feeling heavy and used in a way she hadn't experienced in a lifetime. Beside her, David was a mountain of warmth. The weight of his arm across her waist was a solid, grounding presence. She watched the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, his skin smooth and vast. She felt the heat rising again within her, but slipped carefully out from under his arm to freshen up in the bathroom. When she was back in the bed, she lay still next to him, absorbing his presence in the morning. The silence was different now. It wasn't the hollow silence of a woman alone. It was the comfortable, breathing silence of two people who had survived a storm. David stirred, a low grumble vibrating in his chest. He shifted, pulling her closer into the curve of his body, his face burying into the crook of her neck. His salt and pepper goatee was a soft friction against her skin. "Hey," he rasped, his voice thick with sleep. "Hey," she whispered, turning in his arms to face him. His dark eyes were clear, warm, searching hers. He didn't look like a consultant now. He looked like a man who had finally laid down a heavy burden. He reached up, his thumb grazing her lower lip, his gaze dropping to the silver at her temples. "You're even more beautiful in the daylight," he murmured. "Stay right there. I'll be back." It was a command and a promise. The heat and the heaviness swept through her. She stayed right there. The domesticity of the morning was a slow, tender dance. David made coffee in her small kitchen, his large frame making the space look like a dollhouse. He found her stash of condensed milk, grinning as he added a generous pour to his mug. "My mother would approve," he said, leaning against her counter. They didn't talk about the hospital. They talked about the light in the room, the scent of her candles, and the strange, beautiful reality of the last 12 hours. But as the clock ticked toward the afternoon, the outside world began to bleed back in. "We have the night shift tonight," Simone said, her hand resting on his forearm. David's expression shifted, a flicker of professional mask returning, though his eyes remained warm. "I know. It's going to be difficult, being in that ward and not reaching for you. We're professionals, David. We've been doing this a long time." "I know," he said, setting his mug down and pulling her closer between his legs. He held her tight, his cheek resting on her head. "The secret is going to be hard to keep." Walking into King's College Hospital at 7 p.m. felt like stepping into a different dimension. The familiar hum of the monitors, the sharp scent of antiseptic, the frantic energy of the handover. It was all the same, yet everything had changed. Simone was in the middle of a handover with Marie when David walked onto the ward. He was back in another creased shirt, his stethoscope draped around his neck. He looked every bit the authority figure, steady, distant and focused. Dr. Okonkwo, Cherie said, nodding to him. We have a slow progress in room 6. Midwife Richards was just briefing me. David looked at Simone. To anyone else, it was a standard professional gaze, but Simone saw it. He was looking in her. Behind his beautiful lips, she saw the ghost of a smile, a secret shared between the lines of his deep eyes. Thank you, midwife, he said, his voice a steady rumble. I'll review the charts. Carry on. He walked past her, his shoulder brushing her for a fraction of a second, a deliberate hidden contact that sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. Simone took a breath, the scent of the ward filling her lungs, but underneath it all she could still smell a hint of bergamot. She looked at Marie, who was already moving toward the monitors, and then back to David's retreating figure. She was 45, she was a senior midwife, and for the first time in 15 years, the night shift didn't feel long enough. It had been 8 months since they first sat in that Dulwich caquet, and nearly 4 years since David had been widowed. Their time together hadn't always been easy. She had held his hand through the days that hurt the most, the anniversary of Ife's passing, her birthday, the other anniversaries. She'd given him space on the quiet, heavy nights when he needed it. But 8 months into their relationship, the safe space Simone had built for herself felt less like a sanctuary and more like a waiting room. The autumn air had turned to a biting winter chill. David was in Simone's kitchen, the familiar scent of her cinnamon and oud candles thick in the air. He was making tea, moving with the practiced ease of a man who knew exactly where she kept the ginger and the honey. But as he reached for the kettle, the overhead light struck the gold ring on his left hand. Simone watched him from the doorway. Over the last 8 months, she had learned to look past it, to tell herself it was just a piece of metal, but lately it had begun to feel like a barricade. Every time they were intimate, she felt the cool edge of that gold against her skin. Every time they held hands, it was the first thing she felt. "You're in your head again," David said, turning with 2 mugs. He saw her expression, and his smile faltered. "I'm 46, David," she said quietly, not taking the tea. "I don't have another 15 years to wait for a man to decide if I'm a permanent fixture or a temporary comfort. Simone, we've talked about this. I'm here. I'm with you every night that I'm not on call. You're in my bed, David, but you're still keeping your life reserved for a ghost. I took you into my world. I let you see my mess, my stretch marks, my grey hair. I let you under my professional armour. But I feel like I'm auditioning for a role that was already cast 20 years ago. You've taken me out of my safe space, and now I'm standing in the cold while you keep one foot in a grave." David set the mugs down, the porcelain clinking sharply against the counter. He looked at his hand, his thumb reflexively turning the ring. "It's been part of me for half my life, Simone. Taking it off feels like letting her die all over again. And keeping it on feels like letting us die before we've even started," she whispered. The tension followed them to a dinner at Eniola's a week later. It was a milestone, the first time David was officially meeting Simone's inner circle as her partner, not just a friend from work. Eniola's house in Peckham was rich with the blended sense of jollof rice, curry goat and fried plantain amongst other foods, alive with the thrum of R&B, hip-hop, Afro beats and everything in between. Eniola moved through the room with her growing locks swinging, her eyes missing nothing. She had been the one to push Simone toward David, but she was also the fiercest guardian of Simone's heart. Over dinner, the conversation was lively, but the energy was skewed. David was charming, his dark eyes warm as he spoke about his work, but every time he moved his left hand, the table seemed to go silent for Simone. In the kitchen, while they were helping with the dessert, Eniola cornered Simone. "He's fine, Simone. I see why you're hooked. He looks in you just like you said," Eniola whispered, her voice low and urgent. "But that ring is a loud neighbour, babe. It's been 8 months of us and 20 years of her.
Is he moving in, or is he just a long-term guest? He's still grieving, Ola. It's complicated. No, Eniola disagreed, her face softening with pity. You've spent 15 years building a kingdom for yourself. Don't let a man stay in it for free if he's still paying rent somewhere else. You look heart-tired, sis. You took the risk, you let him in, now he needs to show up or get out of the way. When they returned to Brixton that night, the silence in the flat was no longer a comfort. It felt like a void. David turned to her in the hallway. Your friend doesn't trust me. My friend loves me, Simone corrected, her voice quiet, and she sees what I've been trying to ignore. Simone stayed in the doorway, arms crossed. She wasn't crying, she wasn't emotional, she was just tired. David, I can't keep doing this, she said, her voice flat, matter of fact. I've made space for you here, in my home, in my life, but every single time I think we're actually building something, I look down and see that damn ring, and I realize I'm still waiting for you to show up fully. I'm competing with a memory, and I can't win. His hand went to the ring automatically. He didn't even realize he was doing it anymore, just twisted it with his thumb like a nervous tick. It's not a competition, Simone, he said quietly. You know that's not what this is. Then what is it? She asked, not angry, just done. Because from where I'm standing, you've got one foot in my flat and the other foot in a grave, and I'm the one who has to watch you decide which one matters more. He exhaled hard, rubbing his face. You think this is easy for me? You think I don't want to just be here, to not feel like I'm betraying her every time I'm happy with you? Simone's voice cracked, just a little. She's gone, David. She's been gone for 4 years, and I'm sorry, I am, but I'm here, right now, and I need to know if you're actually with me, or if I'm just keeping the bed warm until you figure out how to forgive yourself. He looked at her, and for a moment she saw it, the fear, the guilt, the man who'd built his entire identity around being the widower and didn't know who he was without it. I don't know how to let go of her and still be a good man, he admitted, his voice low and raw. If I take this off, he held up his hand, if I stop carrying her with me and I just let her go, what does that say about what we had? That it meant nothing, that I can just move on? Simone's jaw tightened. She wanted to comfort him. She'd spent months doing exactly that. But tonight, she just couldn't. You're already moved on, David. You're in my bed. You're in my kitchen. You know where I keep the honey, for God's sake. But you're still treating me like I'm temporary, like I'm something you're trying out while you work through your feelings, and I'm too frickin' old for that. Hearing herself say those words, speak her truth, she realized that she had already made her decision. She walked to the door and opened it. The cold air from outside rushed in, sharp and unwelcome. Go home, she said quietly. Go back to your flat and your memories and your guilt. I was fine before you, I can be fine again. But I won't be someone's backup plan while they figure out if they're ready to live. David stood there, staring at her like he wanted to argue, to fix it, to say the right thing. But nothing came, because deep down he knew she was right. He walked past her, stopped at the threshold, and turned back one last time. Simone, don't, she said, not looking at him. Just don't. He left. The door closed, and for the first time in 8 months, Simone's flat was quiet again. Not peaceful, just quiet. The weeks following the breakup were a slow, agonizing return to the grey. Simone retreated into her work with a ferocity that worried even the most seasoned colleagues. She was the first one on the ward and the last to leave. her professional mask so seamless it felt like porcelain. But at King's, you could not truly hide. Every time the double doors hissed open, her body betrayed her. Her skin would prickle, her lungs searching for a hint of bergamot in the recycled air. When David did appear for a neonatal review, the distance between them was cavernous. They spoke in the shorthand of clinicians, brief, cold, and devastatingly polite. He looked terrible. The salt and pepper in his goatee seemed more silver than black, and the light in his soulful eyes had been replaced by a hollow, haunted stare. He still wore the ring. The breaking point didn't happen on the ward. It happened in Simone's kitchen. Marcus had come down from Manchester for a weekend, his presence filling the flat with the scent of laundry detergent and youthful energy. He sat at the table, watching his mother move. She was cleaning a counter that was already spotless, her movements jerky and forced. "Mum," Marcus said, catching her hand. "Stop! You're vibrating!" Simone tried to pull away, but he held on. He was 20 now, with his father's height but his mother's eyes that could see right through a performance. "I'm just tired, Marcus. The shifts have been—" "It's not the shifts," he interrupted. "The flat smells like you're trying to bury something. Too much oud, not enough air. And you haven't mentioned David once." Simone froze. She hadn't realised she'd mentioned him enough for Marcus to notice the silence. "It didn't work out," she said, her voice brittle. "He wasn't ready to leave his past behind, and I was tired of waiting." Marcus leaned back, his expression unusually grave. "You know, when Dad first left, you closed every curtain in this house, and then you stayed in the dark for 15 years to make sure I was safe. But I'm grown now, Mum. You don't have to stay in the dark for me. If he's the one who made you turn the lights back on, maybe he's worth the struggle, even if he's a bit broken." "He's still married to a ghost," Simone said. "Then tell him that, not as a midwife, but as a woman. Don't let your safe space become a prison again just because you're scared of a little mess." Across the city, David was sitting in his darkened apartment, the silence of the room pressing against him. He looked at the photo of Ife on his mantel, then down at the gold band on his finger. For 2 years, the ring had been his anchor, but as he thought of Simone, the velvety silk of her cheek, the way she had looked in him, the way she had welcomed him into her sanctuary, he realised the anchor had become a noose. He was strangling his future to preserve a memory that was already etched in his heart. He thought of the feel of Simone in his arms, the honest jiggle of her flesh, the shimmer of her stretch marks, the direct, honest way she did everything. She had offered him her truth, and he hid behind a piece of metal. He thought of the hospital. He thought of the way she looked at him now, with a professional respect that felt like a death sentence. He realised then that Simone hadn't just been a transition, she was the destination, and if he didn't move now, he would be a ghost long before he was ever buried. The confrontation happened at 3:47 a.m. in the small, flickering staff room. Simone was reaching for the secret kettle when she felt the air change. The scent of bergamot arrived before he did. She didn't turn around. "Simone," his voice was closer than she expected. She turned. David was standing less than a metre away, looking raw, professional armour stripped away. Without a word, he held up his left hand. The finger was bare. There was a pale, thin circle of skin where the gold had lived for 2 decades, but the ring was gone. "I put it in a box," he said quietly.
It will always be in my heart, but it belongs to my history, not my future." Simone looked at the pale mark on his finger, then up at his face. Her chest felt tight. "We can't do this here," she whispered. "I know. Can I come over after shift?" She hesitated, then nodded once. After shift. Simone's flat was quiet in the grey morning light. She'd barely had time to light her candle when she heard the knock. 3 soft taps that somehow felt different from every other time he'd stood at her door. She opened it. David stood there in his coat, still in his scrubs underneath, looking like he hadn't slept. The pale band on his finger caught the hallway light. "Come in," she said. He stepped inside, and the familiar scent of Simone's flat hit him like a physical thing. He'd missed it, missed her. They stood in the hallway for a long moment, neither quite knowing how to start. "I need you to understand something," David said finally, his voice low and rough. "When Ife died, I thought my life was over. I didn't think I'd ever feel anything again. And then you walked into that recess room, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt awake. It terrified me." Simone wrapped her arms around herself. "So you kept the ring on to remind yourself not to feel too much." "I kept it on because I didn't know how to be a man without it," he admitted. "But these last few weeks without you, Simone, I've been more lost and hopeless than I ever was before." He took a step closer. She didn't back away. "I went to her grave yesterday," he continued, his voice cracking. "I told her about you, about how you make me laugh, how you don't take my rubbish, how you look at me like I'm not broken. And I realised she'd be furious with me for wasting this, for wasting you." Simone's eyes were wet now, but she still didn't speak. "I'm not asking you to compete with a memory," David said, his voice cracking. "I'm asking you to let me build a life with you, a real one. I'm asking to come home." "This isn't just about the ring, David," she whispered. "I need you to know you're all in, not halfway, not 1 foot out the door." "I'm in," he said, and the certainty in his voice finally broke something loose in her chest. She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the exhaustion, the vulnerability, the man who'd finally chosen to live again. "Don't make me regret this," she breathed. "Never." He closed the distance between them in 2 steps. His hands came up to frame her face, warm, solid, real, and then he crashed his lips down to hers. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate, hungry and fierce, the kiss of 2 people who'd been starving themselves and were finally able to feast. Simone made a sound low in her throat and grabbed the front of his coat, pulling him closer, needing to feel the weight of him, the realness of him. His hand slid from her face to her waist, his arms sliding round her and hauling her against him, as if he wanted to absorb her. David backed her against the wall, pressing hard against her. His hands came back to her face as he rained kisses all over it. She preened and stretched with satisfaction, even as she pulled him into her, desperate to have him even closer. As they broke apart, David rested his forehead against hers, fighting to control his emotions. "I've missed you," he rasped. "God, Simone, I've missed you." "And don't leave again," she whispered, her fingers still twisted in his coat. "I won't." He kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense. His hands found the hem of her jumper, fingers brushing the skin of her waist, and she shivered. "David!" "Tell me to stop," he murmured against her mouth. "If this is too fast, after where we've come from, I'll stop." Instead, she took his hand, the one with the pale band of skin, and placed it over her heart. He could feel it racing under his palm. "I don't want you to stop. I want you to stay." He kissed her neck, right where her pulse was jumping, and felt her knees buckle slightly. He caught her, steadied her, then lifted her easily, exactly the way he had that first night, and she wrapped her legs around his waist. "Bedroom?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes." He laid her down on the bed, and the late morning light turned everything soft and golden. He shrugged out of his coat, pulled off his scrubs, and when he settled over her, the weight of him felt like an answer to a question she'd been asking for weeks. "Look at me," she whispered, echoing what he'd said to her all those months ago. He did. His dark eyes were clear, present, here. "I see you, all of you, and I'm not going anywhere." When he kissed her again, when they finally came together in the quiet sanctuary of her flat, it wasn't just passion, it was a promise, a choice. Two people who'd survived the dark, deciding to reach for the light together. After, they lay tangled in her sheets, her head on his chest, his leg over hers, his hand running slow, heavy and possessive from her neck down to her bottom and back up again, claiming her as his. "We're doing this properly," Simone said quietly. "No more half measures. You're either here or you're not." "I'm here," David said, kissing the top of her head. "I'm home." And for the first time in 15 years, Simone's flat didn't just feel like her sanctuary, it felt like theirs. The coming out of midwife Richards and Dr. Okonkwo wasn't marked by an announcement, but by the quiet death of 100 small pretenses. It was the way David started bringing 2 Tupperware containers for the 3 a.m. lulls. It was the way Simone stopped stiffening when he entered a room, her body instead leaning imperceptibly towards his heat like a flower to the sun. The Ward family, the Porters, the HCAs, the cleaners, watched with the sharp proprietary eyes of people who had seen these two survive the trenches alone for too long. The official confirmation happened during a particularly grueling Friday night. The ward was over capacity, 3 sirens were wailing in the distance, and the air was thick with the scent of adrenaline and floor wax. In the middle of the chaos, David caught Simone's eye across the nursing station. He didn't speak. He simply walked over, took the heavy charting folder from her cramped hand, and replaced it with a bottle of water he'd already unscrewed. Then he reached out and tucked a stray silver-threaded braid back behind her ear. It was a domestic gesture, performed in the centre of the NHS storm. Marie, leaning against the desk, let out a soft, satisfied hum. "About time," she muttered. The laughter that rippled through the station was the sound of the Ward family closing ranks around them. 2 of their best had finally found a soft place to land. The true ending happened on a quiet Saturday evening in March. David had gone to Ife's grave that morning, alone. He needed to say goodbye properly, to explain that loving again didn't erase what they'd had, it honoured it by choosing to keep living. When he arrived at Simone's flat that evening, she opened the door in a soft sweater, her braids pinned up, the silver at her temples catching the lamplight. "Simone," he began, taking her hands and pulling her into the living room, the sanctuary where he'd first tasted her tea and where she'd cried about the ring. "You let me into your world when I was a lost soul clinging to my grief and memories. You held space for me. You created new memories with me. You've helped me rediscover myself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a band of hammered rose gold set with a single glowing, perfectly set diamond. "I don't want to be a guest here anymore. I want to wake up here every morning. I want to grow old in this flat that smells like home." He knelt on one knee. "Will you marry me?" Simone looked down at the man who had looked in her until she finally saw herself again. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, David." As he slipped the ring on her finger, the rose gold was warm against her dark skin. The 15-year silence was over. The sun was finally up. And so, in a small flat in Brixton, the sun finally rose on a love that refused to stay in the shadows. Simone and David's journey reminds us that no matter how many years we've spent in the winter of our lives, it is never too late for a second spring,
as long as we are brave enough to lay down the ghosts of the past. At Heart, Soul and Melanin, we believe our stories are our power. We tell them not just to entertain, but to see ourselves reflected in all our complexity, our resilience, and our capacity for joy. If Simone and David's story touched your heart, please subscribe, join our community, and tell us what you thought of the story. Your input will help me to keep telling these unapologetic stories of Black love and life, and to keep getting better at it. Next week, we return to the London Love Stories universe with another passionate, heartfelt, soulful love story. Hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss it. We'd hate for you to be endlessly scrolling trying to find us in your feed. Yep, we've been there. So see you in the next one, and until then, remember, you've got a multitude of stories still to explore in your life, and even in the longest night shift, the light is always coming. This is Heart, Soul and Melanin. Thank you so much for listening.